Hello again. I'm back, and you're here for even more. This is going to go over the other kind of jazz that we've been listening to or thinking about in the 70s and 80s. So, our agenda for today, we're going to look at jazz in the 70s and 80s. We're going to go over a little overview of both the history and the music itself, kind of characteristics, right? And then I want to take a little bit of a closer look at fusion, jazz rock, and mainstream jazz. So, in terms of a historical overview, the in the 1970s, the end of the Vietnam War and the anti-war movement occurred. The United States officially withdrew from Vietnam in 1973, marking a major turning point in American foreign policy. The Watergate scandal occurred. This political scandal led to President Nixon's resignation in 1974 and raised questions about trust in our government. An oil crisis. The OPEC oil embargo in 1973 caused major disruptions to the global economy, leading to long lines at gas stations and economic instability. Roe versus Wade. The Supreme Court's decision legalizing abortion in 1973 sparked intense debate and activism on both sides. We had the Cold War. Tensions between the United States and Soviet Union continued, with events like the Yom Kippur War highlighting the potential for conflict. You also have the gay liberation movement as well. In the 1980s, the Reagan era. Ronald Reagan's election in 1980 ushered in a new era of conservative politics in the United States. The Cold War intensifies. The 1980s saw a resurgence of the Cold War tensions, with the US and Soviet Union engaging in an arms race and supporting opposing sides in proxy conflicts around the world. We have emergence of new technologies in the 1980s. We saw a rise of personal computers in the beginnings of the internet transforming communication and information access. We have the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was the symbolic end of the Cold War, which came in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And we had economic growth. Despite some economic challenges, the 1980s saw a period of economic growth in many Western countries. So, moving on to our next slide, we have a musical overview, which let me move myself so you can see my picture. During this period of history, musically, there was a lot of debate amongst musicians to explore different new instruments that were coming to life. The synthesizer was quite prominent in New York at that time. It was used to reproduce music of the great Baroque masters, so like 16th, 17th century, or 17th, 18th century, excuse me, prior to being discovered by jazzers. Other electronic instruments or additions to musical instruments included fuzz phasers, which were basically guitar pedals that combine a fuzz effect with a phaser effect. They're like giant pedal boards that you see on the ground at, say, a show of some sort that might have a guitar, an electric guitar, and which you could see up here. It has these buttons, and when you click on them, different sounds will come out of your instrument. They had electric pianos or keyboards, clavinet, which I have pictured here as well, which is an electric keyboard instrument that has a more percussive, funky sound. It attempts to mimic the sound of a clavichord with about more robust tones. Ring modulations, which are audio effects that create unique dissonant sounds by combining two audio signals together. And echoplexes, which were a classic tape delay effect unit. It uses a loop of magnetic tape to record and play back the original audio signal. The delay time is determined by the distance between the record and playback heads and the speed of the tape. If that didn't make sense to you, that's okay. I'm just giving more information. Anyways, many musicians rejected these newer sounds and additions to their instruments because they were very connected to their acoustic instruments. They believed that these additions would interfere with the talent inherent with acoustic instruments and musicians. This was a key debate of the 70s. It's reminiscent of the way the third stream movement shocked many of the audiences who were not used to listening to classical and jazz music in the 60s. Even though these new sounds may be seen as problematic by audiences and musicians, we need to remember that change is good. Think about the 60s. Because of leaders like Stan Kenton and Gunther Schuller, we were able to introduce jazz as a staple in the curricula of many colleges. From page 190 of Bruce Yurchko's History of Jazz book that I've been quoting to you since day one, jazz musicians began to yield to the pressures of their respective recording companies, which were much like the pressures Miles Davis felt from Columbia in the late 60s. Commercial appeals lured many musicians to cross over and compete with the jazz rock performers who were reaching big numbers in record sales. It may be added that some musicians were tired of dwelling in the shadows of relative obscurity and poverty. There's a fine line between musicians who cannot sacrifice their musical ideas at any cost and those who have developed an open minded approach to popular considerations. Although there was a wide gap between these groups in the 70s, musicians in the 80s have closed this chasm in hopes of retaining jazz integrity in electric music. In the 80s, much of the electric jazz we hear what has confused the public as to what the real intention and meaning of the music was. Of course, the term jazz is confusing. It entails a lot, different sonorities, and could be described as outdated. There's a journalistic trend towards numerous classifications and trends in an attempt to define all music. So, I wanted to talk about fusion, which blends traditional jazz elements with other genres like, R&B, rock, classical, soul music. And three really fantastic fusion artists that I have. Excuse me. Huh. It's been a long day. It's 8 o'clock when I'm recording this now. Anyways, we have Chick Corea, Weather Report, and Jaco Pastorius. So I want to read their bios to you. We have Chick Corea, which was an extraordinary musician who was born in Chelsea, Massachusetts on June 11th, 1942. He began playing piano at age 4. His musical development was strongly influenced and encouraged by his father. Chick grew up listening to the classical masters and became influenced by the recordings of Bud Powell, Charlie Parker, Lester Young, and Horace Silver. His early work as a sideman for Willie Bobo, Cal Shader, Herbie Mann, and Mongo Santamaria greatly influenced his continuous love for Latin music. He joined the Miles Davis Band in 1968 and later played with the avant-garde group Circle, which reflected the strong free jazz movement of Ornette Coleman and Paul Bley. Chick's pioneering spirit has placed him at the forefront of musical development in the 70s and 80s. Like many keyboard musicians, he began his career with the acoustic piano. He switched to electric piano while with Miles Davis in 1968. Yeah, and that's all kind of the most important stuff about this. I do have for Chick Corea, Spain, which is one of his most popular tracks, and one that is a favorite that I love jam into with the windows open. So I hope you enjoy. Okay, sorry, I got way too invested there. Next we have Weather Report. It seems almost paradoxical that yet another great fusion band would spring up from the seeds planted by the Bitches Brew sessions of Miles Davis. While Chick Corea had gone to form Return to Forever, John McLaughlin, the gifted guitarist, assembled the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Meanwhile, Joe Zanuel and Wayne Shorter went on from the earth-shaking Miles Davis Electric Band to form Weather Report. Their collaboration as composers and musicians continued for 14 years with a top-selling album every year. Joe Zanuel, I don't know if that's how you actually say his name. I've never actually said any of these people's names, so I'm very sorry if I'm saying it wrong. Was born in 1932 in Vienna, Austria, where he studied at the Vienna Conservatory of Music from age 7. As a gifted keyboard player, performing on several instruments, he was featured with Austria's leading bands. He came to the U.S. in 1959, where he toured with Maynard Ferguson for 8 months. After leaving Ferguson, he had various club dates with Slide Hampton and Dinah Washington. His most notable tenure was with Cannonball Adderley, where he composed Mercy, Mercy, Mercy. After leaving Adderley in the late 60s, he joined Miles Davis on several sessions, including In a Silent Way, for which he composed the title track, and Bitches Brew. Wayne Shorter was a tenor sax player and composer and was also weaned on early mainstream jazz. He was born in Newark, New Jersey in 1933 and studied music education at NYU, New York University, for 4 years. After a stint in the Army, during which he also worked with Horace Silver, he came to New York City, joining the bands of Maynard Ferguson and then Art Blakey. He received a call to play in the second Great Miles Davis Band in 1964 and remained with him throughout the Bitches Brew recordings. He's a very important composer of such mainstream standards such as Footprints, ESP, Speak No Evil, Children of the Night, and Ner- Nefertiti. Nefertiti, yes, among many others. Goodness gracious. Let's listen to Weather Report. I have Birdland. Listen to a live recording. If you listen to different recordings of these two, it may not be swung, so okay. And on to our last person, who is actually also in Weather Report, Jaco Pastorius.
Born in 1951, Yako entered Weather Report with drummer Peter Erskine in 1976. The young and gifted Pistorius sent fusion style electric bass playing to new heights with his incredible technique while impressing many of the younger bass players throughout the country. He is remembered also for his compositions, Teen Town, and the bass solo Slang in the Weather Report album Heavy Weather. His album, Yako Pistorius, which we're going to listen to a track from. What track it is, I can't remember, but that's okay. Showed that he had enhanced his abilities not only in single notes, but also in chords, textures, and other surprising nuances. Pistorius was greatly influenced by the electronic devices and techniques used by Jimi Hendrix, such as feedback and distortion. Yako redefined the role of the bass player by expanding himself into a multi-dimensional soloist as well as a timekeeper in many styles. He constantly experimented in every jazz style, carefully exploring each form. His funk style was a perfect complement to the early influence of guitarist John McLaughlin, who also redefined the funk rock style into the jazz language. The successful combination of all these styles and innovative techniques helped give definition to fusion. This daring bass guitarist virtuoso was able to execute incredible musical figures never thought possible on the instrument. He was perfect. He was the perfect musical foil for Joe Zawinul on keyboards, setting off many new unexplored musical directions. His presence in Weather Report helped propel the group to even greater musical achievements. Unfortunately, this troubled man who dared bare his soul was tragically murdered in 1987. Yikes. Let's take a listen to whatever song this is, and if I remember, I'll pause and tell you the name. How I put down the chicken. The chicken is a great standard. Listen for the bass here, because Yako's playing, but also the chicken is so iconic. I played this in high school, and all my friends were like, "Ah, the chicken! It's so funny." But it honestly was such a good piece. I'll start again. I think that the 70s and the 80s are my favorite musical genre, hands down. I don't think I've ever danced like this in one of my videos. Hey, so we have jazz rock, um, our progressive view of rock in the late 60s. So this combination of rock and jazz that we have, um, we can kind of see here in this table. We have rock our left hand column, jazz on our right, rock depending on higher levels of volume for effect, while jazz contrasts more levels. Rock has more of a rhythmic approach and is very vertical and static, whereas jazz's rhythmic approach is very varied and horizontal. So jazz we're looking more left to right, whereas rock we're looking very up and down, just kind of keeping our beat there. Uh,
Rock melody is usually dominated by vocals, while jazz melody is usually dominated by instruments. Rock structure is based on simple songs, while jazz structure is varied and is usually extended. The chord progressions in rock are simple, while the chord progressions in jazz are not. They're usually extended and complex. Most melodic and solo material is planned in rock, while improvised solos play an important role in jazz music. Rock is more recreational, while jazz is more of a pure art form. And of course, rock is more commercial, jazz is less commercial. So I have two jazz rock icons. I got Herbie Hancock and Don Ellis, in addition to Quincy Jones, Miles Davis, Chick Corea, who we heard in the other side before, Maynard Ferguson, who I believe I played for you last week, George Benson, and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, which is a group that used jazz horns, kind of like Chicago. Um, Herbie Hancock is absolutely incredible. I might have discussed him last week. I feel like I did. Um, but he's so incredible that I would like to play for you again. I want to play Chameleon because for your reading this week, I found this really nifty, neat article on JSTOR from the Mid America American Studies Association. It's called Chameleon Meets Soul Train. Herbie, James, Michael, Demita Joe, and Jazz Funk. And it's really interesting about Chameleon in general and Hancock's album and what people thought of it. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. It's not too long, I don't think. Um, I was very intrigued by it when I read it. So I wanted to play a little bit of Chameleon for you so that I never put Chameleon in here for you. So that you could get a little bit of a hint. Here, wait. Let me do YouTube. And I'll do Chameleon. Perfect, it's right here. Hear that. I want to skip a little bit so that you could hear a little bit more. You get the idea. All right, and then we'll go back to the slideshow. To here and play from current side. Great. And then the other person that I wanted to talk about a little bit was Don Ellis, which some of you have written about him recently, I believe. I believe I have something about him here that I want to read to you. Don Ellis was a creative giant who passed away at the age of 44 as a result of congenital heart condition. A congenital heart condition. I think it's congenital. I should know. My wife is a nurse. His contributions to jazz were truly enormous. The use of odd and exotic meters or time signatures go back to his days at UCLA, where he studied Indian rhythms in the early 60s and created the Hindustani Orchestra, which employed 3 drummers and 3 string basses. As a trumpet player, he was one of the first to use a 4-valve trumpet to play quarter tones, and ring modulator, echoplex, and phase shifter for special effects. Don Ellis at Fillmore in 1970 was one of his follow-ups to Electric Bath, and extended his experiments with odd meters, as in Hank Levy's charts, Rock Odyssey, which begins in a slow 7/4 meter with the middle section in a 12/8 divided 2/2/3/2/3. The Fillmore album, which was recorded live, also expanded Ellis's use of the ring modular and echoplex amplifying devices. His band, composed of 5 woodwinds, 8 brass, and 6 rhythm, produced some hair-raising results, dipping into the rock and free-form solo styles. On the contrary, Ellis's early 1971 Tears of Joy used a string quartet in addition to regular big band instrumentation, with French horn and tuba to fill out the brass voicing. Yeah. So I have 2 pieces for you. I have I'm trying to think of what pieces they were, but they sound completely different. This is Whiplash. And if we listen here, we can hear his different meters, right? We can hear 77/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we can kind of hear that really being portrayed by the bass. And the percussion helps guide that, giving the 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Get the vibe. And this other one I feel like Whiplash kind of has this sense of a composure to it, while this next is the theme from the French Revolution, I think it's called. The French Connection, sorry. Theme from the French Connection, which sounds way different than this. And you can definitely hear the kind of more experimental aspects of it that provide that rhythmic instability that we here in this era of music. Also, that's a cello. get the idea. Great. So here's our differences, a chart from Yoroshko's book on page 201 between jazz rock and jazz fusion. Jazz rock, definitely more commercial, using arrangements of popular music, while jazz fusion is less commercial, using more original music. Jazz fusion had smaller bands, while jazz rock had larger bands as well as small groups. Of course, jazz fusion had a free use of improvisation, while jazz rock had limited improvisation. There were more traditional musical elements used in jazz rock and more experimental in jazz fusion. And in jazz rock, rhythms and forms are steady, while in fusion, the rhythms and forms change frequently to extensions. Uh, and this is kind of like that hardline definition, I guess, between rock and jazz from that chart that I was showing you earlier. Um, yeah, it's kind of very similar. So then we also have this thing called mainstream jazz, which is essentially um, our big band era, but you know, now we're in the 70s and 80s. So mainstream jazz is a term established in the 1950s by music journalist Stanley Dance, who considered anything within the popular jazz music of the swing era mainstream. Another way to describe mainstream music is music that does not incorporate the bebop style. Mainstream jazz was used to describe the type of music trumpeter Buck Clayton and his contemporaries, veterans of the swing era, were playing in the 1950s. Rather than modernize their styles and play bebop or join Dixieland bands, which some did on a part-time basis to survive, the former big band stars, which include players like Coleman Hawkins, Lester Young, Harry Addison, and Roy Eldridge, jammed standards and riff tunes into smaller groups. Mainstream jazz was largely driven by singers. Many vocalists from the swing era sang with these smaller bands and continued to sing the standards, like Ella Fitzgerald, dubbed the First Lady of Song, set the gold standard in the art of jazz singing. Ella was one of the myriad of great female vocalists of the era, including Sarah Vaughan, Peggy Lee, Billie Holiday, Anita O'Day, Helen Merrill, Dakota Staton, and Carmen McRae. Nat King Cole was perhaps the greatest male singer of the era, but Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board, dominated record sales and was a key figure in making jazz part of pop culture. Other great male vocalists of the period include Oscar Brown Jr., Billy Eckstine, Mel Torme, Joe Williams, Andy Bay, Bing Crosby, Johnny Hartman, Arthur Prysock, and Jimmy Scott. During the 1950s and 60s, jazz music was ubiquitous. Mainstream jazz was on the radio. Jazz records were sold in stores, and Hollywood frequently incorporated jazz into television shows and films. It wasn't until artists like Elvis Presley and other rock and roll and R&B influences became more prevalent and that mainstream jazz became less desirable. By the mid 1960s, mainstream jazz was completely overshadowed by other styles, and its original players gradually passed away. So, I have a whole list of mainstream jazz icons. You can take a picture. Oh, if you would like to, take a listen to some that stick out to me. The Pat Metheny guitar group. Um, I also really do like Peter Erskine, um, Elaine Elias. John Fedchock is awesome. The Yellow Jackets and Sun Ra, amazing groups. And of course, Arturo Sandoval is, and Roy Hargrove. Uh, yeah. So take a look at those. And hopefully you can include some of those in your playlist assignments. I'm really looking forward to reading all of this. Please email me if you have any questions about anything. I am more than happy to help whenever you need it. So just holler and I'll help you out. All right, my friends. I hope everybody's doing well and staying cool and enjoying the course. All right, I'll see you guys next week. Thanks.